subtitled An Ecological Interpretation of the American Constitution. The good news is it's done. The bad news is it's twice as long as any publisher will take it. So I'm in the process of editing it down and trying to turn it into one single thread, finding a publisher. But it's also got me going back and really looking at the American Constitution. And I'm using the Constitution, the word Constitution, in two senses. America has two constitutions, really. First, we have that written document that was written in Philadelphia in 1787. When you hear the word Constitution, that's usually what people refer to. But there's this other Constitution. It's the Constitution in the broader sense of, well, how's your Constitution? The Constitution in the sense of how a thing is made up. And in that sense, that second unwritten constitution, like the British talk about their constitution, is our values, our culture, our national character. So I want to look at, the book is looking at both of those. Today, I want to focus exclusively on that first written constitution that we're all talking about. And I want to specifically look at the role of the Supreme Court and use it as an indication of where we are as a nation and maybe where we are as a culture also. And I want to very briefly deal with some legal issues. I hope no one here's a lawyer. Deal with and dealing with some of those legal issues, and use as an example the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, which everyone is a little bit familiar with that. Okay, and hopefully that'll set up some bigger issues like the role of money in American politics. And next month I want to talk about the whole issue of rights and liberties. And I'll use that to move into the last three lectures to return to this very big notion of the environment, the economy, okay, and where we might be headed. I apologize. Let me just quickly deal with a couple structural issues about the American judicial system, and I apologize if this is overly simplistic. The American judicial system has been referred to as a dual hierarchy. Okay. It's dual because we have two legal systems in this country. We have a federal system that deals obviously with federal laws, and we have a state judicial system that deals with state laws. And the state judicial system is very important because it's the states that have the police power, which means most criminal law starts here. Okay? It's hierarchical. It's hierarchical because you have lower courts. In the Federalist, we have 88 district courts. We are in the Western District of the North Carolina, all right, so which is Charlotte, Asheville, Statesville. Then you have appellate courts. We are in the Fourth Circuit Court, which is Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, North and South Carolina. And then, of course, you have the U.S. Supreme Court. Over here you have all sorts of state courts of limited jurisdiction, et cetera, okay? One of the big things, the reason this is important is where cases take place depends upon where cases start and how they work their way through the system, depends upon which courts have jurisdiction, okay? Jurisdiction is the authority of a court to render a binding decision in a case. So if there's a federal issue, it'll start off in the federal courts. If there's a state issue, it'll start off in state courts. If it's a combined state and federal issue, it might work its way up through the states and then over to the U.S. Supreme Court. But jurisdiction is one key concept. The other key concept has to do with who is entitled or who is permitted to be in court and have their case heard, okay? This is referred to as standing. Who has standing to be in court? In order to have standing, you have to have several things. First, you must have an injury. Right? Courts in this country, it's an adversarial system. They do not give advisory opinions. If the state of Delaware, for instance, for over 200 years had a law on the books making it illegal, it was a blasphemy law, making it illegal to say anything against Jesus Christ or the God, and the penalty was to have the letter B branded into your forehead.
Blasphemous.
Yeah.
Blasphemy.
Does that law violate the Constitution? Maybe. Well, why was it on the books for 200 years? Could I go to court and say, look, I want you to declare this law unconstitutional? The answer is no, I can't. Why not? Because I don't have standing. Because the judges would say, are you being hurt by this? Is anybody being hurt by this? Has anybody ever been arrested under this law? See this? Without injury, you just can't ask the court for advice. Do you think this law is constitutional? There must be injury, okay? And here's the toughest one. Who can be injured? You must have this thing, and here's where it's getting tough. You must have this thing called personhood. You must be something. Notice I'm not saying somebody. You must have something that is capable of being hurt, capable of being injured, and the courts have got to be able to redress that injury. Just because the courts have jurisdiction and you have standing, that doesn't mean they're going to. That doesn't mean they're going to hear it. Everybody got that? Because this is going to be important. What is a corporation? Do corporations have personhood? Now this is difficult because the word personhood, I think we'll all agree, is somewhat awkward. And so what's happened in America is we've developed this almost equally difficult thing. Are corporations people? Okay. Can corporations, not what you have to do is you have to educate the American people that what they're really asking is, do corporations have standing in court? Okay? And the answer to that is yes. Okay? As far back as 1815, get ready, here come all series of Supreme Court decisions. In the case of Tarrant versus Taylor, the Supreme Court made an interesting distinction. They talked about public corporations, that is, cities, counties, towns, are public corporations. The city of Asheville is a public corporation, but as a public corporation, that means that the state legislature can do whatever it wants with it. It can abolish the city of Asheville tomorrow. It can require Asheville to get their permission to annex and all that stuff. And then what the courts did in Tarrant versus Taylor is they came up with this strange notion of a private corporation. I say strange because logically, private and corporation is a contradiction. If you're incorporated, that was a public act that did it, but they said, no, what's a private corporation? A private corporation is anything that's not a public corporation, okay? So, General Electric is a private corporation. In 1815, we established in this country the notion of a private corporation, okay? In 1819, in the Dartmouth College case, what I'm going to try to get you to see this step-by-step process. In the Dartmouth College case, they said private corporations have protections under the contract clause of the Constitution. So in other words, yes, there's this thing called a private corporation, and yes, They have certain things. For instance, the state legislature cannot impair contracts of private corporations. They're not quite at the point where they're saying corporations have rights, all right? But they're moving to in the degree to say the corporations have something of personhood to them. Got it? Then in 1844, the Supreme Court ruled in the Louisville, Cincinnati, and Charlotte, Louisville, Cincinnati, and Charlotte Railroad versus somebody less than. The private corporations are citizens of the state in which they're incorporated. See it? So now corporations are citizens. And then the big bomb came in 1886 with the Santa Clara Railroad. Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. Where the court ruled that corporations are constitutionally protected persons. Okay? Between 1844 and 1886, what happened? You had the Civil War, and you had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments being passed. And the 14th Amendment says, nor shall any person be denied life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. Okay? That's the 14th Amendment. What the court ruled of Santa Clara County was the corporations are persons under the 14th Amendment.
Is this happening in any other countries? Or are we standing alone with this kind of thing?
I think that, the real answer is I don't know. But I cannot conceive of how you could have, I believe I spent a lot of time trying to think of, what would I change? Would I repeal any of these decisions? Revoke it? I mean, what I'm going to talk to in a little bit is the difference between logic, okay, and consequences. Logically, this seems a little bit strange. But as far as the consequences, why did the Supreme Court do this? The Supreme Court did this probably because I cannot conceive of even a rudimentary capitalist society, without some form, can you conceive of a society where you don't have corporations? And if you're going to have corporations, then the question becomes, well, what protections does the act of incorporation give you? And then I think this is the big one. Once you give corporations standing, right? Then you've said to some extent they're people. One of the things that really busted this open for me was remember after the Citizens United case, President Obama gave a State of the Union address, and he talked about we have to do something to reverse the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United. And the camera focused down there, and Justice Samuel Alito, who was in the majority of that case, was just shaking his head no. And he made a comment that it was interesting. It was like, he said, quote, the Citizens United case was a very easy case to decide. He said it didn't take a lot of And when you go back, yeah, I can see this. You're talking about 200 years of precedent here. And the problem is, each of these is linked. You know, maybe, let's repeal Santa Clara County. But how can you repeal Santa Clara County without repealing Louisville, Cincinnati, right? If they're citizens, then they're people. And how can you do that without saying that they don't have contracts? And that's the tough, I don't, the answer is I don't know the answer to yours, but I just can't imagine how corporations don't have standing in Britain or any other democracy. And not only that, would I change it if I could? I want to be able to sue BP. Because not only can corporations, what this all means is not only can corporations be injured, corporations can also injure. Right? So if British Petroleum, due to negligence, if British Petroleum dumps, you know, millions of gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, I want to be able to sue them. And I don't mean suing the chairman of the board. I'll go after him too. But I want to sue that corporation. I want to bring that corporation into court. Now, if you say, okay, but you can't say, you know, I get to sue the corporation and it can't hire a lawyer. You couldn't say that. So if they have standing, they have the right to be sued and they have the right to sue. And if they have those rights, then they have the right to hire lawyers. Then they have the right to call witnesses. Okay? They have all sorts of procedural rights of due process. The question is, do they also have substantive rights? I mean, they have rights in court. Do they also have substantive rights? Do they have the right to freedom of speech? See this? Do they have the right? Here's the one that's terrifying me. Do they have the right to privacy? This is what's coming down the road, by the way. A corporation, I can see an agricultural corporation saying, disclosing where these tomatoes were grown violates our corporate right to privacy. Telling you what's in this cereal, you know, is a violation of our privacy. Now, they're already protected. They do not have to disclose any copyrighted information. That's already given. How does the Supreme Court decide these cases? What theories of jurisprudence do they use? And this will move us a step forward. There has been for a long time, the dominant view is what's called declarative jurisprudence. Follow me here because it's going to end up someplace important. This is the legal theory that underpins the American Constitution. Here it's different because under here it is clear that under the American system you have separation of powers, which means you have an independent judiciary, okay? Which means that the judiciary is not supposed to make policy, okay? Making public policy is the function of the legislative branch, is the function of the elected branch. Justice Scalia would be quite quick to point out nobody elected him. Okay? He cannot make policy. Well, then what is his job? His job follows this. This is what Justice Scalia would say. He would say that there is a higher law tradition in America. Americans believe that there can be such a thing as unjust laws. I've never met an American. Last time I said, I quoted John Hobbes, or Thomas Hobbes, there can be no such thing as an unjust law. I've never met an American that believes that. All right? Why not? Because Americans believe that there is some higher standard, higher than the positive law the legislatures make. All right? And laws, positive laws that violate that higher tradition should be declared aren't laws at all. And then secondly then, the Constitution is our embodiment of that law. Americans are raised since they're, as Abraham Lincoln would say, prattling on their mother's laps to worship the Constitution. It is our national religion. Okay? The Constitution, therefore, step 3, the Constitution is fixed. It's permanent. It can be amended, very difficult. But the principles embodied in the Constitution do not change over time. If you want to get Ron Paul, if you want to set Ron Paul off in a fit, talk to him about an evolving Constitution. You know, higher law does not evolve. Okay? Therefore, the Constitution. So if it's fixed, 4, the principles contained in it are applicable everywhere. The Constitution has the answer to all questions. The function of a judge, therefore, is not to make policy. The function of a judge is a case is brought before him or her. They look at that case. They look at the law involved in that case. And they ask the question, is that law logically consistent with the Constitution? Okay? If it is, leave it alone. It's not the judge's job to say if it's a good law or a bad law. Okay? If it's a wise law or a stupid law. Their only question is, does the law that Congress passed, is it logically contradicts the Constitution? The declarative theory believes in logic. Okay? It believes in judicial restraint. Judges should not make policy. Okay?
But, may I interrupt you?
Sure, please
Since
do.
I just did. Over time, with ongoing decisions, that does influence policy, right? Isn't policy influenced?
Who are you asking this question of?
You.
Just let me. My opinions don't matter. Let me tell you how Justice Scalia would respond. Justice Scalia would say, yes, of course, the policies evolve, but the principles behind them do not. Okay? The principles of separation of powers does not change over time. And when you ask me, Justice Scalia, to make policy, you're asking me to take on a legislative function. You're asking me to violate the Constitution, and I've sworn an oath to abide by it. I think. Let me say now, back as Fred Kalinowski. I don't think you can understand these issues unless you can understand both sides of them. Okay? Antonin Scalia is not a fool. He may be probably the most educated, intelligent person on that court. And I think to understand how he gets to the decisions he reaches, you have to get inside of his mind. And he would respond to your question like that. Yes, the policies evolve. Yes, the policies change. But the principles do not. Okay? These principles are embedded in stare decisis, the rule of precedent. And these precedents all go back. And he would say, I know he would, that the thing about this line of precedent, as the lawyers would say, is each is logically consistent with the one before it. And I confess, you know, whether being objective or biased, I look back at those and say, God damn, they are consistent.
Well, let's go ahead and answer this question. Why is the Constitution so holy? I mean, is there divine intervention or something? We always look at Congress now is flawed. You know, politicians now are flawed. Why are the constitutional often so unflawed? Why are they so perfect?
You know, and that's an excellent question. And the answer is legal lawyers are trained, and Harvard lawyers are very well trained, to this principle number 2 here. There is nothing above the Constitution. You know, when a law comes before the Supreme Court, all right, it is the function of the Supreme Court to interpret that law vis-a-vis the Constitution. It is not their function to interpret the Constitution. Okay? I mean, it is not the purpose to say, does the Constitution abide by the higher law? Let me tell you a story. Back during the first Punic War, when I was graduating from college, a buddy of mine, Griffiths, he graduated and I graduated. He went to law school, I went to graduate school. He went to Santa Clara Law School, I went to Claremont Graduate School. And so we kind of followed our careers, and we'd get on the phone and go back and forth. And when I finished my coursework, I had to take my comprehensive exams for my PhD. And I'll never forget, my first question on my first comprehensive exam was, what is justice? You have 8 hours to respond. And 14 blue books later, I came walking out, and I couldn't wait to get to a telephone after having a cold beverage. And I called Griff. I said, Griff, I've been thinking about you all afternoon. I said, the first question on my qualifying exams was, what is justice? And I'll never forget his answer. He says, Jesus, that's a question we never get asked in law school. We do not talk it. We know what justice. That's justice. I mean, that's why chapter 2 of my book, when you have people that challenge the Constitution, is the Constitution democratic? Does the Constitution provide economic justice? The question I want to ask, the question my book asks is the Constitution of the United States ecologically sustainable? You can answer that any way. I don't think you can say it's unimportant. Okay? But people that have challenged the justice of the Charles Beard and the progressives, that challenged the constitutionality. I mean, the Constitution was a just document. They are seen as being un-American. Fair? I mean, have you been to Washington? This is a good idea. Look at the statue, the visual image that we construct to portray our Constitution, our Supreme Court. The statue in front of the Supreme Court building is a statue of justice. First of all, it's a woman, which I find interesting. Secondly,
Inappropriate.
Interesting. Secondly, she's blindfolded. She's blindfolded. She doesn't care what race you are. She doesn't care about the consequences. Okay? And in one hand, she's holding a scale. You put the law in one balance, you put the Constitution in the other balance. And you just stand there and hold them out. Do they balance each other? Fine. What she got in her other hand? A sword. Okay? If the law balances with the Constitution, you keep the sword in its sheath. If the law does not balance with the Constitution, you chop it off. You declare it null and void. That statue is the clearest visual image of the declarative theory of justice, jurisprudence I can think of. This leads to, of course, this is the theory behind American conservatism. Okay? Well, things change. Let me get my dates right here. Come on, where are you? It's 1908. It's the height of the progressive era. Progressives are coming into power in Congress and in the states. And you have a Supreme Court that is very, very conservative. But one progressive has managed to sneak onto the Supreme Court. His name is Oliver Wendell Holmes. And he is the absolute picture of Boston, rich Brahmin, long handlebar mustache, lieutenant in the Civil War, wounded at Antietam, Harvard educated, and now he's sitting on the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has to hear the case of Mueller versus Oregon. The state of Oregon, then and now, is controlled by progressives. They've passed a law saying that women who work in dangerous industries, laundry, things with chemicals and things like this, cannot be required to work more than 10 hours a day. This was what progressive politics looked like in 1908, all right? It was an attempt to regulate working conditions. Mueller, who owned a laundry, challenged the legality of the Oregon law, claiming it violated his contract with his employees. Got it? Now, the Supreme Court had to hear the case of Mueller versus Oregon. Anybody around would have told you that the Supreme Court is going to strike down that Oregon law. If you use this theory here, if you use this logic, then you have to say the Oregon regulation of labor conditions and working hours violates the contract between the employer and employee. Boom. And they had done that. I mean, they were doing it constantly. Okay? Oh, if there was a moment in history I could go back to. Oh, God, I would have loved to have been there in that Supreme Court building when the lawyer for Oregon walked into the court. The state of Oregon had hired this little, skinny, short little guy. I can picture him right now, poorly dressed. He was Jewish and looked it. He wore little wire-rimmed glasses. And he walked into the court. His name was Louis Brandeis. And Louis Brandeis came into the court to defend Oregon's right to regulate businesses. See it? And he laid down what later became known as sociological jurisprudence, sometimes called legal realism. Okay, and he argued before the justices, and I wanted to see the expression on Oliver Wendell Holmes' face. Okay, when Brandeis said, "Look, this Constitution, you people are not just simply logical machines. The Constitution of the United States is an evolving document. It changes. as policies and times change. The truths behind the Constitution change over time. There exists not only a higher law, he says there exists a common good. And you justices are as committed to that common good as you are to this higher principles. And therefore, the court must consider the impact of its decisions. It's not just logic, it's consequences. And whereas for all these years, lawyers had been walking into the Supreme Court with case after case after case that they used to prop up their decisions, Brandeis walked into court with health records, with sociological impact statements. What is the impact on young girls that are working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week? What is the impact on their health of the lies and the chemicals? He did not use logic, he used evidence. See it? This,
He ended up on the Supreme Court himself, didn't he?
can you imagine that, I mean, the impact he had on Oliver Wendell Holmes? You don't have to imagine it, I'll tell you what it was. A few years later, there became an opening on the Supreme Court. Now, one of the things the Supreme Court justices never do is to campaign for candidates. Oliver Wendell Holmes went to Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States, and said, I think it's time that we have a Jew on the Supreme Court. And may I recommend this young lawyer, Lloyd Brandeis. And Wilson appointed Lloyd Brandeis to the Supreme Court. And if you want some, and for the next 20 or 30 years, these people were always in the majority. I mean, the court kept coming down with conservative decisions after conservative decision after conservative decision. But the Holmes-Brandeis dissents, the Holmes-Brandeis pounding of this legal realism, face reality.
But why did he have to use the Jewish
Oh, I think it was. I think it was.
rather than progressive?
Yeah, I think it was a case for, they were arguing for diversity.
Okay.
Okay. They was arguing for diversity. It's ironic. I checked before I came in here.
You still are.
Do you know that there's not a single Protestant on the Supreme Court?
All Catholics and Jews.
Oh, yeah, 5 Catholics and 3 Jews.
Yeah.
Or, and 6 and 3. Yeah. Can you see the differences in the line? And this has become, if you can understand the difference between, well, let me finish off this story. Brandeis and Holmes were the minority. Oregon, by the way, did win the case. Brandeis were the minority for years. But something happened in American law. Law professors started taking this up, started teaching this. Yale. Okay? Carl Llewellyn, Roscoe Pound, a whole series of, this is how change comes, like a whole series of law professors started, I mean, they kept teaching this, but they kept teaching this also. one of my fondest moments, Jessica Culpepper. If anybody ever finds Jessica, we'll tell her I said it. Jessica Culpepper was one of my students at Warren Wilson. Excellent student. She got accepted to Harvard Law School, which she also got accepted at Georgetown. Harvard teaches pretty much this. Georgetown has a program where you learn, it's called like Plan B or something like this. You learn the rudiments of formal legal education, but you also take courses in justice. You also take courses in sociology and things like this. And she called up admission into this special Georgetown program is pretty exclusive. She called up Georgetown, she says, I've been accepted, can I get into this special program? And they said, well, it usually takes us a couple of months to decide, and we haven't made our decision yet. And she said, well, I've been accepted at Harvard Law, and they need to know an answer. How about if I call you back in 2 hours and you tell me? She called Georgetown back. I don't know if it was 2 hours, but briefly back. And they said, you're into the program. And the only student I have ever had to turn down an acceptance at Harvard Law School, she called Harvard and said, thanks, but I'm going to Georgetown. The last I heard, Jessica had just been admitted to practice law before the United States Supreme Court. These are my buttons busting, as you can tell. This got taught in the law schools. She is, by the 1930s, now these students of legal realism were starting to practice law. They were starting to get into judgeships. So that now, when the 1950s came along, okay, people like Earl Warren, Brennan, Blackman, Frankfurter, who had been raised, I mean, how did they get to this judicial activism, this liberal? They've been trained in it. And it all goes back to Mueller versus Ark. Okay? But don't give up on these folks. So from then until now, I think what you can see is, I mean, the differences between the conservatives and the liberals on the court today. Okay, the conservatives, it's not one of intelligence, certainly. The conservatives strictly adhere, Scalia, Alito, Roberts, okay? They strictly adhere to, or I don't know, strictly, they go by this, okay? The liberals, they want to know what's the logic, okay?
What if I were admitted to Harvard, but I suddenly found that I had strong leanings toward this realism? After X years at Harvard, am I just automatically
No,
committed
I mean,
to
no,
this?
Lawrence Tribe did a lot of Harvard, yeah. I mean, there are professors, all right. There are professors at Harvard that teach this. But Harvard legal education, I don't think I'm slandering anybody to say it's a very conservative education. I mean, you will be able to recite every case. Good Lord, you're going to be an expert at it. And you will understand logic. Okay? And for these people, and you'll know how to respond to these people. When these people say, yes, but what's going to be the consequences of this decision? What's going to be the impact of this decision? Roberts, Alito, Kennedy, Scalia, they're going to say, that's not our job. Don't you believe in separation of powers? Making policy, this is making policy. Now, to which Bader Ginsburg, Sotomayor, Kagan, Breyer, they're going to answer, of course it's making policy, and you're naive to think we don't.
Citizens United.
Oh, immediately relevant. I mean, this is why, can you see it? I mean, this is why why did Alito make the statement, it was an easy decision to make? Because logically, it is. I apologize, I should have, and I will, log on and look at some of the dissents in Citizens United. You can guess, what's the dissent going to be?
I don't even know what it is.
Oh, well, okay, we'll get to it. Right? No, I apologize. Yeah. The dissent's going to be this.
Corporations and money.
The consequences of this decision, they won't spell it out. They won't spell it out this bluntly, but it's probably the end of any form of democracy in this country. That's a pretty significant consequence.
Consequences be damned.
Consequence, that's not our job. Okay? This is the price we pay for separation of powers. Now, to answer your previous question, I mean, you know, in other countries, they don't pretend that there's separation of powers. There's no separation of powers in British politics. Okay?
They don't have a written constitution.
And they don't have a written constitution. Maybe two advantages they have. Okay? Logic, consequences. See it? Okay. Let's turn then. Oops. Let's turn then to Citizens United. If anybody invents a Wayback Machine, I want to see Brandeis and Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. This was decided in 2010. Okay? I mean, let's bring everybody up to date on it. Okay? In 2002, Congress passed what was called the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, the BCRA. Okay? Otherwise known more commonly as the McCain-Feingold Act. Now, the BCRA was a further step from the 1971 and 1974 Federal Election Campaign Acts. This is campaign financing. This is a brief history of campaign financing in America. Okay, 1971 and 74. Okay, 2001 was it two? McCain-Feingold. Okay. What this campaign finance laws did was they set limits on how much you could contribute to political parties. Okay? They provided for public financing of presidential elections. They said that spending you must declare the sources of your funds. Okay? You must have public disclosure. And McCain-Feingold limited how much you could spend 30 and 60 days prior to an election. Got it? Now, they also, and this is 71 and 74, 71 and 74 made a very important distinction. They distinguish between campaign spending, which they define as spending designed to get someone elected to office, all right? Vote for Karen, she's a terrific candidate. I am advocating her election. Got it? Since the Congress can control campaigns, Congress can control spending on campaigns. Follow that? But they made another distinction between what's called issue ads. An issue ad does not advocate the election of anyone. Okay? It is simply a statement of opinion, argument, right? So I can put out an ad, if I put out an ad that says elect Karen Nolan to the US House. That's campaign spending. If I put out an ad that's saying, well, it's true that Karen was never indicted for fraudulent misappropriation of funds. That statement is true, all right? I'm not advocating the election of anyone, and it's an issue ad. See this?
Where we say overturn Obamacare or something like that.
That's an issue ad. Notice this. Notice this.
Clear cutting.
Positive messages tend to be considered campaign spending. Issue ads, you're always legally covered if you go negative. Okay? So in effect, one of the consequences of FICA and McCain-Feingold, I think, was to greatly increase the amount of negative message. Add to that the fact that public opinion polls show two things. One, Americans hate negative campaigning, advertising, and two, Americans usually vote according to negative campaigning is tremendously effective.
But back in 71, 74, they didn't have to have that disclaimer on the bottom one, right? Because now they do.
I think that it's not a disclaimer. It's a disclosure.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the disclosure came out, you'd have to force me to go through my
Yeah, I
minutes,
don't-
but I think the disclosure came in 74, I believe.
I don't remember
Yeah,
what they have today.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Big,
yeah.
I paid for this and all.
yeah, which probably, well, I'm jumping ahead, but I can't imagine how that can stand. I mean, that's gonna be the next thing overturned. Especially if, if corporations have privacy. It's none of your business who I contribute. All right, in 2008, you got this, that's the legal background. In 2008, Citizens United released a document called, I think it was just called Hillary, okay? It was in fact a smear on Hillary Clinton, okay? It was in fact, an attempt, again, it was an attempt to argue that Hillary Clinton should not be elected president, should not get the nomination to be elected president. Citizens United wanted to run that right up to the election in various primaries, in various primary states. They went to court to get an injunction against the Federal Election Commission, following this, to allow, blocking the FEC from blocking them from running their campaign. Their argument was, once again, fairly simple. This documentary is freedom of speech. Okay? As a private corporation, as a private group, we have certain rights. See this? That among those rights are freedom of speech. Now, in 1976, these cases have to do with standing. Okay? These cases have to do with money. Okay? In 1976, in a case called Buckley versus Vallejo, United States Senator Jim Buckley took the Federal Election Commission, which is the organization in charge of enforcing the Federal Election Campaign Act, took them to court and challenged certain aspects of the '74 Federal Election Campaign Act. Okay? What the court ruled in Buckley versus Vallejo is spending money is speech. Okay? The government, Congress can limit how much you contribute to political parties, so-called soft money. And they can limit how much an individual candidate can respond. But independent groups, which became known as political action committees, independent political action committees can raise as much money as they can. There can be no limits on how much money you raise, okay? And there can be no restrictions on how much money you spend. So what the Supreme Court did, what 5 justices in the Supreme Court did in the Citizens United case, is simply to take Santa Clara County and combine it with Buckley versus Vallejo. This is as good an explanation of this as I can give. Do you see it? Corporations are people. They have personhood. They are persons. They have rights. That among those rights is speech, guaranteed by the First Amendment to the Constitution. And spending money is speech. Therefore, any law passed by Congress that limits how much money corporations or public action committees, political action committees, or 527 another form of groups, no matter how much they can raise as much as they can get, and they can spend it, as long as they're spending it on issue ads, they can spend it as much as they want. So now, yes, so now, what is it? 2.5 years before the presidential elections, right? The Obamacare ads are coming out. Okay. And the I guess it's the Democratic Party that's funding the Hagen thing, but you're getting allies. Now, interestingly enough, Citizens United kept in place the public disclosure elements. But anybody that's looked at this is going to tell you that that's the next thing to go. Because if they have freedom, because the corporations have freedom of speech, the corporations have not only standing, right, but rights under the Constitution. What constitutional rights do they have? Clearly they have procedural rights. Now we know they have freedom of speech.
Well, the disclosure part wasn't raised in that, in Citizens United, was it? It wasn't argued before the court?
I can't answer your question. Do you know?
No.
No, I don't know if it was argued or just left standing. Okay? But it seems to me, if you combine Santa Clara County with Buckley versus Vallejo, with Griswold versus Connecticut, which says that the Constitution of the United States provides a right to privacy.
Why not unlimited spending on campaigns?
Oh, yeah.
That hasn't happened yet, but that wasn't part of the decision, but that could happen too. The Citizens United was only dealt with issue ads?
I think so. I think so. All right.
But there still are limits on campaign spending.
Well, there's limits on campaign there's limits to campaign, no, I do know the answer to that. There are no limits on contributions or spending to PACs, okay? There are limits to contributions and spend, or contributions, not to spending, to political campaigns, okay? So what's happening now? What's happening is you have Clinton for president as a political campaign, then you have the Hillary Clinton Political Action Committee. Okay? These people can raise and spend as much as they want. These people cannot. As long as these people are distinct from those people, both sides are obeying the law. Now, what's the truth? The truth is that these, do you think there's any connection between the Hillary Clinton Political Action Committee and Hillary Clinton's campaign? Let me think.
So all they had to do was declare themselves a corporation.
Not a corporation. Oh, well, they had to incorporate
Okay.
as a political action committee. okay? It's a nonprofit. I mean, there's all sorts of, nonprofits or corporations, right?
Well, definitely corporation, but.
Yeah, yeah. What bugs me, and it's bugged me for 3 years now, is it makes so goddamn much sense.
Even though it's gonna destroy democracy, like you said.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, logic and consequences. The logic of it, I don't know, I just call it impeccable, but it's good. But the consequences, you know, I mean, the money, there's no doubt that we're gonna have, 2016 is gonna be a presidential election where each side's gonna spend $1 billion.
Well, we already see the consequences of it in North Carolina.
Oh, in North Carolina, you know, Art Pope bought the governorship.
And the legislature.
Yeah. You didn't want to go half-hearted.
So the media is who benefits.
Pardon?
The media
They're the only benefit.
benefits.
Oh, tremendously benefit. They tremendously benefit. They can't raise the prices of their ads high enough to dissuade these people from purchasing time. Right? Tremendous benefit.
It's what sustains them for 4 years. When you look at newspapers and you look at TV, radio.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things, no, talking about foreign country, one of the amazing things about elections in America that completely befuddles foreigners, Europeans, is the length of our elections. I mean, and now it is certain, I mean, you know, they say that, you know, the 2016 presidential elections don't start until after the 2014 congressional elections. But they've started. They're raising money.
Isn't it true in foreign countries it's a shorter time frame and they're limited to what they can spend?
That I don't know.
Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe it's changed.
yeah, I don't know.
But they only can spend so much for so much time.
Yeah, but what do they do about issue ads?
Do they have them?
What stops them?
I don't know.
I mean, the British and French and Germans have as much free speech as we do. Right?
Doesn't get the.
They have commercial television.
It doesn't get the press that we do.
Yeah. Well, you asked me if I was going to be, that's about as objective as I can get. Let's get a little biased. Let's suppose, just for yucks and grins, that we want to try to save the American political system.
Good luck.
Yeah, besides that.
People say it's still.
Granted, it's an uphill battle. What would you do?
Well, we've got a campaign going on right now to change to have a amendment to the Constitution to overturn.
But what would you
Okay.
but what would you overturn? I mean, what would you change about this?
Well, I'd change a lot of things. I'd put some, you know, in the Constitution itself,
That
specific limits.
But what do you do? How does that affect free speech?
It means everybody can spend up to whatever I put in the Constitution.
And that's
And they're all
and that's all the free
and
speech
they're all
you get.
treated- And they're all treated fairly.
I don't know if I like telling you can talk, but only for this much. You know, you can
And
publish. You can publish.
if it's in
Somebody
the
told me
Con-
you can publish books. You can publish your book, but you can't print more than 5,000 copies.
Okay, so for every dollar you spend on political ads, you have to give to a charity.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Or you have to give to the poor, you have to find a way to make the life of some people.
But doesn't that set a problem?
Yeah.
Like, if I don't like the charity you
Well,
want
maybe
me
not
to
a
donate
charity,
to?
but maybe just put it right back into Medicare.
Well, the reality of getting a constitutional amendment in this country that is so polarized is very slim.
That's not gonna happen.
So, to me, based on historic facts, the only thing that changes this over a period of time is the change in the makeup of the Supreme Court that begins to go back to consequences and makes more of a balance there. But this isn't just logical. What are the consequences of that?
Yeah,
And that doesn't happen overnight.
no, I know, right. But I guess it's my basic concern. I'm not sure I trust the liberals on the court that their consequences are the consequences I want.
It's a lifetime appointment, you get somebody.
Yeah,
in.
I used to tell my American government students, I used to say, you know proof that Americans don't understand their political system? The proof that Americans don't understand their political system is we assassinate presidents and not Supreme Court justices. If you understood how the system worked, leave the president alone, he's gonna be gone in 8 years, who cares? Blast Scalia. That, I am not advocating. That was,
We heard you, Frank.
It's on you, it's on the.
oh,
No.
that was a funny.
Your example is very telling. Like, you are a hunter and you don't want to have gun control, and we are a nation more and more of single issue people, which adds to this polarization and the fact that the idea of, to me, is getting more and more foreign that we are going to ever sort of come together, in my lifetime anyway, to change the Constitution, to come together on some issue.
So, would you like to
Get the
hear,
votes.
would you like to hear my thoughts on
Yes,
saving the country?
Sure.
move to Canada. Move to Canada.
No.
That's why we're here. I might save you without the country.
I think we have to talk about, what this really boils down to is a conversation, a deeper conversation about elections and the role of money in America. Okay? Congress last week passed a budget, a 2-year budget, $1 trillion. Now, it is incredibly naive to believe that the federal government's going to spend $1 trillion and people aren't going to try to influence how that money gets spent. If you got a representative democracy, people are going to try to influence government. How do you influence government? There's 2 ways to influence government that I know of: political parties and interest groups. The unpleasant truth is this: as the power of one goes down, the power of the other goes up. Why do interest groups, your good question, why do interest groups have such tremendous power in America? And the answer is because we have the weakest political parties of any democracy on earth. If you want to run a campaign for a United States Senator, you can go to the political party and they're going to give you peanuts. All right? If you want to win that party, you better go out there and hit the hustings and get the interest groups. And what has this country done? This country has waged war on political parties. McCain and Feingold stood up and bragged about how we're going to outlaw soft money. What is soft money? Soft money is money given to political parties, see this, to use for campaigns. What we ought to outlaw is hard money. What we ought, I would first step, repeal McCain, Feingold, repeal every campaign finance reform law we've passed in this country. And pass a good campaign law that tells the truth. Giving money directly to candidates should be called what it is. It's bribery.
What did Huey Long used to say about a good politician? They stay bought.
Yeah, right, right. Outlaw contributions, outlaw interest group contributions to candidates. See it? Next step, that means candidates' only source of financing is going to come from the political party. If you want
Or
to,
the government.
Huh?
What about public financing?
public financing, no, but public financing of elections won't do any good. Because first of all, as we've seen in the presidential elections, we've had public financing of presidential elections for 40 years.
Yeah, but it was an option. What if it wasn't an option? The only option you had was public
If
financing.
the only option you have was public financing of congressional elections, we'll say,
All of it.
then what would happen would be all the interest group money would simply go to, it's called front loading. You know, what are you going to publicly finance? Are you going to publicly finance the primaries? There are 8 candidates running for United States Senator in North Carolina for the Republicans. Are you going to publicly finance every one of those? If you say yes, it's like, I'm not sure I want my money to go to some of those wackos. And secondly, if you say no, we're only going to publicly finance the election, and all that money is going to get poured into the primaries.
Could you pre-qualify primary
If
people?
you pre-qualified them, then whatever that
It
precept
would
was.
go back.
Yeah. But let me say this. So step 1, strengthen parties. Make the parties responsible for all campaign financing.
So then you think we should have more than two big parties?
Hang with it. Step 3, eliminate primaries. Primaries were a bad idea to begin with. All right? Step 4, candidates will be selected now by the political parties, which is going to strengthen them even more. Okay? We need, and as the strength of the political party, as the political parties get stronger, Great Britain,
Hall?
yeah, in some extent, yeah. But at least we had elections here.